A modern construction site is a volatile ecosystem. From the moment the sun rises until the final shift clocks out, suspended loads, heavy plant equipment, and raw materials are in constant motion, creating physical hazards that shift unpredictably by the hour. South African industrial operations are governed by two primary statutory pillars: the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the OHS Act, and the National Environmental Management Act, known as Nema. Baseline REAL compliance serves as a minimum standard, but it operates as a static defense against hazards that are constantly changing. Relying solely on the letter of the law can leave an organization blind to operational vulnerabilities that emerge between scheduled inspections. A reactive, tick-box mentality means waiting for a failure to occur before you manage it. A proactive health, safety, and environmental management system absorbs that volatility and controls the hazard long before it can trigger a legal penalty. To build that system, we have to map out exactly how statutory duties are divided between employers and employees, trace the distribution of legal liability through a corporate hierarchy, and define the absolute environmental duty of care. We start with how the OHS Act defines risk. It is strictly calculated as the probability that an injury or damage will actually occur. Understanding the rigid structure of this law is the mandatory first step. Only by mastering the legal framework can you build a management system capable of protecting both human lives and the corporate bottom line. To see how this legal theory applies to physical reality, consider a high-risk hazard, an open excavation trench on a busy site. Under Section 8 of the OHS Act, the employer has an absolute mandate to maintain a safe and risk-free work environment. The law dictates that hazards must be mitigated at the source before the employer can resort to issuing personal protective equipment. This balancing scale represents the legal standard of reasonably practicable. The OHS Act does not demand infinite financial expenditure to remove a risk. Instead, it requires a dynamic balancing formula. On one side of the scale, you must accurately assess the sheer size and severity of the specific hazard. An unshored trench prone to collapse carries a significant weight in potential fatalities. On the other side are your mitigating factors. You have to prove what technical knowledge is available to solve the problem and secure the suitable physical means to execute that solution. The final mitigating factor is cost. The legal defense relies on justifying the financial expenditure of the mitigation relative to the tangible safety benefit it provides. But the law does not place the burden entirely on management. Under Section 14, employees have a reciprocal statutory duty to report hazards and adhere strictly to site safety procedures. If management fails to shore that excavation trench because they deemed it too expensive, they directly violate Section 8. Conversely, if the trench is properly shored and cordoned off, but a worker willfully ignores the hazard markers and enters the exclusion zone, that employee violates their own mandate under Section 14. Safety under the OHS Act is a legally shared liability between the employer providing the safe environment and the employee operating safely within it. A single corporate entity cannot physically oversee every hazard across multiple sites. The organization has to distribute this shared accountability across a complex internal hierarchy. The OHS Act utilizes a system of mandatory and discretionary legal appointments to bind specific individuals to specific safety duties. This organizational chart maps the flow of statutory liability. At the very peak sits the Section 16(1) appointee, the Chief Executive Officer. The CEO bears ultimate legal accountability for ensuring the entire HSE management system functions correctly. Below the CEO are Section 16(2) assignees. These are delegates legally appointed to manage the specific site logistics and divisions that the CEO cannot physically oversee on a daily basis. There is a critical legal caveat here. Assigning a 16(2) subordinate delegates the operational duty, but it does not transfer ultimate legal accountability away from the CEO. The structure branches further into specialized, hazard-specific appointments governed by separate regulations, like the GMR 21 Supervisor of Machinery, who oversees all mechanical plant equipment on a given site. Consider a scenario where a subcontractor operates an unsafe piece of heavy machinery on your site, resulting in a severe incident. The investigation looks past the individual operator to examine the underlying contractor vetting protocols. This process identifies the specific failure points that connect the site incident to the Principal 16.2 and 16.1 appointees. Signing an appointment letter does not shield the appointee from prosecution. It formalizes their acceptance of liability for that specific operational duty. Legal appointments forge an unbroken, traceable chain of accountability from the boardroom down to the site floor. This toxic runoff flowing past the site perimeter and into a municipal storm drain illustrates a critical shift in legal exposure. Not all hazards remain contained behind a fence. External consequences are governed by the National Environmental Management Act, or NEMA. Where the OHS Act focuses internally on the physical hazards threatening workers on site, NEMA looks outward, protecting the broader community and the surrounding ecosystem. The core enforcement mechanism here is NEMA Section 28, which establishes an absolute statutory duty of care to prevent environmental degradation. Section 28 possesses a radical retrospective power. Liability under NEMA applies equally to pollution occurring today, pollution that happened years in the past, and even potential future contamination. In the case of the stormwater runoff, an internal failure to contain chemicals immediately triggers an external NEMA violation the second that water hits the municipal drain. The financial burden of all environmental remediation falls entirely on the polluting organization. There is no cap on the cost of cleanup. This absolute duty shifts the corporate risk profile. Managing environmental impact is a strict financial imperative. Management must treat the risk of environmental detriment with the exact same severity and urgency as a critical worker injury. Under NEMA, the environment is a permanent stakeholder. Corporate liability for pollution has no expiration date and respects no geographical limits. When we compare an organization operating strictly at minimum legal compliance against one running a comprehensive HSE management system, the difference in operational resilience is stark. This split screen shows the baseline's flaw. A static checklist is fragile, waiting for an injury or audit to trigger change. The proactive system operates as a continuous loop, identifying hazards and updating controls before failure. Tools like daily observations monitor this in real time. By continuously running these processes, a proactive system inherently generates the precise, detailed documentation that inspectors require to prove legal compliance post-incident. Beyond liability, actively demonstrating this duty of care drives a clear moral benefit, directly improving worker morale and operational pride. Statutory law dictates exactly what must be protected and exactly who is liable if it isn't, but only a proactive management system provides the actionable mechanics of how to achieve it. We've established 5 key principles today. First, ultimate liability starts at the Section 16.1 CEO level, but maintaining safety absolutely requires Section 14 employee buy-in. Second, the reasonably practicable standard demands documented risk assessments and rigorous cost-benefit analysis, not subjective guesses. Third, legal appointments delegate specific operational tasks, but they never dissolve the ultimate accountability held by upper management. Fourth, NEMA Section 28 ensures that corporate liability for environmental degradation is absolute, retrospective, and highly expensive. Finally, minimum legal compliance merely delays inevitable penalties. Proactive management systems actually prevent incidents and protect operating margins. This list of construction regulations represents just a fraction of the statutory framework. How does an HSE professional physically locate and correctly cite these legal provisions during an active site audit or high-stakes investigation? We map out that process in the next episode.